hppodcraft.com.
Hi, I'm Chad Fife.
And I'm Chris Lankey.
And this is the H.P. Lovecraft Literary Podcast.
At hppodcraft.com.
This is our 62nd show, Chris.
Yeah, number 62.
That's 61 more than Heil Honey, I'm Home. You remember that? It was that British show where it was Adolf Hitler and Eva Braun living together. It was like a 1950s sitcom, and then like a Jewish couple moved in next door.
Yeah.
One episode. Anyway, we just wanted to let everybody know we're still taking donations for the release of From Beyond by Bruce Greene and The Picture in the House read by Andrew Lehman. We're about halfway there.
Almost 1,000.
Of course, any size contribution is fine.
Anything will help free these wonderful things out into the world.
Yeah, and you know what? If you don't think it's worth it, okay. You'll still get them for free. That's okay.
Yeah, eventually they'll be out there.
Also, Richard M. Mathis over at darkmythos.com he contacted us about a contest they're running until the 17th of this month. That's a site that focuses on Fantasy Flight Games products.
Yeah, like the Call of Cthulhu card game and also Arkham Horror.
They want people to photograph or Photoshop themselves into Lovecraftian situations and send them in to the site, again, by the 17th. And the ones they like the most, they're going to give away 2 copies of Arkham Horror, the game, it's a pretty expensive game, actually.
Yeah, it is.
As well as some products from the webcomics Lovecraft is Missing and The Watcher of Yathagu.
Oh, okay.
Yathagu.
Yathagu.
We'll put links up to those comics. You know, we've not mentioned them on the show before, but I think it's some pretty fun stuff.
Oh, yeah.
I was thinking of sending in a photo of myself just sleeping. That's a Lovecraftian situation, isn't
Sure,
it?
yeah.
I'm dreaming, man.
Cthulhu, he sleeps too.
That's right. Ooh, it's chilling.
This week, we are jumping into a story called The Last Test. Now, this one is not actually written by H.P. Lovecraft, but it's sort of co-written. Adolphe de Castro wrote a story, and Lovecraft kind of rewrote it.
That's right.
Few persons know the inside of the Clarendon story, or even that there is an inside not reached by the newspapers. It was a San Francisco sensation in the days before the fire, both because of the panic and menace that kept it company, and because of its close linkage with the governor of the state. Governor Dalton, it will be recalled, was Clarendon's best friend and later married his sister. Neither Dalton nor Mrs. Dalton would ever discuss the painful affair, but somehow the facts have leaked out to a limited circle. But for that, and for the years which have given a sort of vagueness and impersonality to the actors, one would still pause before probing into secrets so strictly guarded at the time.
So it seems like they're not talking about what happened to this
Clarendon. It was a sensation in the entire city, but what actually happened behind the scenes is something that few people know about.
Right. This week's reader is none other than Marty Johnson, who is a presenter on BBC here, on BBC One, I believe, and in the UK. Yeah, super cool. And he's a great reader, as you heard, and just all-around great guy.
I like to call this story the last test of my patience. Man, it took forever. It's long, and I just...
I have to say, for some reason, when I was reading this story, I kept thinking of like a 1950s B movie.
Oh, absolutely. Even with the speeches in the end of the story.
Yeah.
That's funny. I did, too. It totally seemed that way. Like,
even though it's written in the 20s, it still felt like a 1950s B movie to me.
Yeah. Ed Wood kind of like,
exactly.
He tampered in God's domain.
Well, before we get too critical of it, which we will momentarily,
sure.
Let's just try and get through the story. The main players of this tale of sadness and woe is Dr. Alfred Clarendon, who is the brother of Georgina. Right. Now, there's also this third guy, James Dalton. Now, James has the hots for young Georgina, and he's also a young guy. And he goes to Old Man Clarendon and says, hey, I want to marry your daughter. But Old Man Clarendon says, no way, you're poor. Your family stinks. Get out of here.
And Old Man Clarendon's a total prick. I mean, so the thing is, this all happens in San Francisco, the story.
Yes.
And at the beginning, you know that these 3 main players have a relationship. And they explain it because where they end up is James Dalton becomes the governor of California.
Right.
And Dr. Alfred Clarendon, as we learn in the first few paragraphs, has been appointed as the medical director of San Quentin Penitentiary sometime in the 1890s. But 10 years before that, these people all knew each other in New York City.
Yeah.
When the two Clarendons were growing up with their father, Old Man Clarendon, that you mentioned, and then James, they were all friends. But the parent, Old Man Clarendon, and James Dalton's father were both Wall Street guys. Old Man Clarendon was really ruthless, and one day he stripped Dalton's father of everything he owned during some fight on the stock exchange. He basically bankrupted him, which had some pretty terrible consequences.
He killed himself.
because he was so broke, he needed his family to keep living, and the only thing he had left was his life insurance, so he blew his own brains out.
Yep.
So that his family could have something to live on.
But and here's the thing. James didn't begrudge Old Man Clarendon for being such a jerk, because he was like, well, it was the game that my dad was playing, and my dad just didn't play it very well. Which
I know, I couldn't believe that he had that in there.
Well, because I think what it was about was he still wanted to marry Georgina, and he's got to kind of reconcile that somehow in his mind, that he's going to go ask this guy who, drove his father.
And the way
to
he
suicide.
reconciled it was by saying, hey, you know what? Hate the player, don't hate the game.
Exactly. That's the backstory. And the father says no, so he goes, screw you guys, I'm out of here. Well, he doesn't say that, but he just leaves and goes to make his life in California.
And I gotta say, I was so excited when I began reading this, because there's no Lovecraft stories in California.
No, I thought that was a really neat and different setting.
Well, this is actually the Old West California, because it's the 1880s, 1890s.
Oh, right, yes. Sort of like the milkshake guy.
What?
The milkshake guy, the guy with the mustache? And he loves his milkshake?
Oh, There Will Be Blood?
There Will Be Blood, that's it. It's that era of California.
Yeah, it's a different world. Dalton goes to California and makes his way. He eventually becomes governor of California.
Governor of California.
And the Clarendons don't even know that happened.
Yeah.
Because after Old Man Clarendon tells him, screw you, you can't have my daughter's hand in marriage, and he says, all right, I'm out of here, they lose contact.
Days later, he dies.
Old Man Clarendon dies, yeah. And Dalton doesn't even hear about it, because he says goodbye to Georgina and goodbye to Alfred, but he takes off, and they don't have contact at all over this stretch of time.
10 years.
I did find that a little hard to believe. I know the world wasn't as connected, obviously, in the 19th century, but how these people that used to be friends didn't know that he had become governor of California.
Well, maybe they just assumed that, it was a different guy, the same name.
Yeah, I guess so. Well, also, the thing that we learn about Alfred is that he is obsessed with his job and science, and he devotes his life entirely to medicine. In fact, he's kind of a prick about it. He says, hey, if you're going to be in this business, you need to devote yourself entirely to medicine, and having a life outside of helping people is selfish. And people who do that, who get married and have kids, they're jerks, because they should be serving science. He rattles off this kind of stuff all the time. Now, his sister, she spends all her time tending to him and taking care of him, because he's a big deal. At 25, he's well-renowned, and by 30, he's world famous for his work in treating fever.
Yeah, well, he discovers an actual disease, the black fever.
Right.
When he discovers this, he travels the world studying diseases and bacteria, infections, and all these types of things. And in his travels, he picks up an entourage.
Yeah, he does.
He gets some tall Tibetan men who are super skinny and wear loose black silk robes.
He goes to Asia, and when he comes back, he's just got these Tibetan guys with him. And then there's another guy he brings back from a trip.
But queerest of all was the general factotum or clinic man, whom Clarendon addressed as Surama, and whom he had brought back with him after a long stay in northern Africa, during which he had studied certain odd, intermittent fevers among the mysterious Saharan Tuaregs, whose descent from the primal race of lost Atlantis is an old archaeological rumour. Surama, a man of great intelligence and seemingly inexhaustible erudition, was as morbidly lean as the Tibetan servants, with swarthy, parchment-like skin, drawn so tightly over his bald pate and hairless face that every line of the skull stood out in ghastly prominence. This death's head effect being heightened by lustrelessly burning black eyes, set with a depth which left to common visibility only a pair of dark, vacant sockets. Unlike the ideal subordinate, he seemed, despite his impassive features, to spend no effort in concealing such emotions as he possessed. Instead, he carried about an insidious atmosphere of irony or amusement, accompanied at certain moments by a deep, guttural chuckle like that of a giant turtle which has just torn to pieces some furry animal and is ambling away towards the sea. His race appeared to be Caucasian, but could not be classified more closely than that. Some of Clarendon's friends thought he looked like a high-caste Hindu, notwithstanding his accentless speech, while many agreed with Georgina, who disliked him, when she gave her opinion that a pharaoh's mummy, if miraculously brought to life, would form a very apt twin for this sardonic skeleton.
Yeah, I thought that was a pretty neat sketch of a character, and one of the very cool things about the story.
One
one. I love the description in there that his chuckle is like a giant turtle tearing some furry animal to pieces.
Yeah. So this is totally Lovecraft because I know specifically that this character wasn't in the original story.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I think that from what accounts I heard of this revision, all the good stuff is Lovecraft's.
Yeah, well, at least all the supernatural stuff is definitely Lovecraft's. The original story was just a guy, he got obsessed with diseases and studying them and kind of treated his sister poorly and all that stuff. It seemed like a pretty boring story.
Yeah, well... Anyway, so basically, Clarendon, he's practicing in New York, and they live a pretty isolated life out there, but he decides he wants a new place to settle, so he moves to San Francisco with his sister.
Well, he's looking for a place to settle, but he wants to get a job at some kind of institution or hospital or something that he could keep doing his studies.
But he doesn't really know how to go about that.
No.
I mean, it's everything kind of happens fortuitously, because they move out to San Francisco just so he can continue his research as they settle in a mansion by Goat Hill. I don't know where that is, but I've eaten at Goat Hill Pizza in San Francisco.
Oh.
That's pretty good. And they accidentally run into Dalton just on the street. They have that great moment where Georgina's like, oh my God, it's my lost love. And he's like, oh my God, I'm the governor of California. I'm just strolling around. And they start catching up and they hang out all the time. And Dalton, he says, I'm going to use my influence as governor to get Alfred, whom he calls Little Alf, a job at San Quentin Penitentiary.
Willie!
Well, so that's the background of everything. The doctor's got a job at San Quentin Penitentiary so he can try to eradicate fever in all its forms, which is his primary focus. Right. And he's got a huge cohort of prisoners that he can test on. We go into the next chapter in which somebody gets black fever in the prison.
At San Quentin. He says, it's not contagious. Don't worry about it. I know black fever. I'm an expert on black fever. Then two days later, 3 more guys get it, and everybody starts freaking out.
Yeah, I know. Don't worry about it. Well, he goes over and he rubs the patient's ears and he talks to him. The patient appears to get better, but he dies. And the sort of menace of it gets out.
The rumor gets started that basically the disease, the black fever, has gotten out of the prison. So people start flipping out, and San Francisco goes nuts, and people are just leaving the town, and businesses are closing, and this happens for a few weeks until they realize there are no cases outside of the prison. The truth finally gets out, and people start to kind of come back. But then they're ticked at Clarendon. They're all ticked at him because he's like a bad doctor and he's not really treating people. And
it's a funny press cycle. The journalists scare everybody, and then people try to profit on it. Like it says the saloons are offering medicated drinks and stuff. Yeah. And then everybody leaves, and it's destroying the infrastructure of San Francisco that nobody's there. The reporters say, no, everything's fine, come back. And then the doctors who had run away start writing editorials against Clarendon like, well, we can take care of it too. We're not afraid of anything. And he's permitting more deaths than are necessary there in the prison. In the name of science, he's letting people get really sick. And it also says that people, they hate unusual, unexplainable things. And that about Clarendon is what's really driving people crazy too. He's got those 8 Orientals who are there and his weird chuckling attendants, and he won't talk to the press.
No, it's all beneath him. It's all beneath his work. He just doesn't want anything to do with it. He doesn't care what people say about him. But Georgina gets bothered by it. And so, Dalton comes by and kind of consoles her. And that's when you meet Dick the St. Bernard, her dog.
Right.
And he's, super nice and everything like that. But there's this incident where one of the reporters climbs over. They kind of have this estate where there's a wall around it and a moat. And this reporter swims the moat, climbs the wall, and gets over to try and see what's going on. And you've discovered that there's this whole menagerie.
Is it a moat that big that you have to swim it?
I don't know.
I thought it was just a ditch or something. No, I loved it.
In my head, he swam it. It was one of those things. And he had to fight off a crocodile or two.
Well, he's a total, paparazzi. I'm getting in there no matter what.
Exactly. And he gets in there and he sees that there's all these animals being kept there. And it's, he's, what's going on? What's happening? All this weird stuff.
Yeah,
and
there's a clinic.
He gets caught and Sarama grabs him basically and just throws him out of the place and into the mud and totally disgraces him. And that guy's like, I'm going to get vengeance. And so he starts spreading this whole crazy rumor around.
Oh, yeah. Well, he fakes an interview. He says, I sat down with Dr. Clarendon, and he said a bunch of crazy shit that's going to make you hate him. He just really fabricates it. It's great.
Totally lied.
And diabolically skillful, it says his article.
Yeah.
It said it succeeded in horrifying 9 readers out of 10 against Dr. Clarendon. Where's that market research come from? San Francisco goes crazy again, this time as much with rage as fear. And it said there ensued a reign of vice and recklessness born out of desperation.
What?
I mean, are the papers wielding this much influence over
people? I know. People are out of control. They're just going nuts, drinking themselves blind.
Now they're not going to run away. They're just having orgies in the street because they're all going to get black fever. Dalton's, as you said, he's coming over. He's comforting Georgina. Clarendon doesn't even care. He doesn't answer any of these articles. Georgina's like, I know that we're supposed to be above this, but these attacks hurt just the same. And then it says, Dalton kissed her hand in a manner not then obsolete among well-born persons. Is there, I mean, what happens? How is it obsolete now? What's so special about it? Is he like kiss the two middle knuckles, then he does like a quick lick on the wrist or something? I mean, is this some kind of secret? What does that mean?
A quick lick on the wrist.
What? I mean, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's totally terrible. Dalton he basically says, Georgina, I want to marry you. I love you. You're great. Let's get married. She goes, okay, you'll have to ask my brother. And as they're having this conversation outside, they hear what sounds like a child screaming, mama, mama.
They hear this, like what they think is a subdued cry of a child. And then Georgina says, you know what? He's got parrots in there, so it's probably just, we're such silly bitches. It's just a parrot. You know what I mean? Totally just forgive themselves.
Yeah, just forgive it. Well, hey, Chad, I don't know if you remember, we had parrots in Santa Monica that lived behind us. You remember that?
Yeah.
That sounded just like kids.
That's true.
It sounded like there were kids that yelled the exact same way every time. And it was weeks or months.
I totally forgot about that.
Yeah, there was weeks or months before I was out in the back and I parked the car and I was like, why is that kid in the... Wait a minute, that's not a kid. That's a freaking parrot. That's mimicking kid sounds. Yeah, it was really creepy.
Maybe they're not too far off base.
They're not too far off base. I'm defending them.
I'm the silly bitch. Well, now, but when they hear that, they go, oh, it's nothing. And later, Dalton says, all right, now's my chance. I'm going to, for the second time, ask to marry Georgina.
Yeah.
And when he asks Clarendon's like, no way.
No.
He's a real jerk about it.
Yeah. He's like, look, I need my sister here. All this, my work and research, if my sister's not here to make this house work, all these people will die. And is that your happiness or her happiness worth that? No, I don't think so. And he's like, but come on. She just kind of cleans the house. She's not, you don't really need her. And, we're family. We should. And he goes, we're not family. Get out of here. You're
an
welcome.
outsider.
You're an outsider. And then he looks in the mirror and sees he's a skeleton.
When he goes to Georgina, he says, all right, well, we don't have his blessing, so you just want to run away together. She goes, you know what? Just wait a while.
Yeah.
If you love me, just wait.
Just wait, because this is a really hard time on my brother. He pretends that all this stuff doesn't mean anything to him, but it's really, the stress is destroying him, and he needs me right now. And if you love me, you'll wait. Of course, Dalton being a good guy, he goes, okay, I'll wait, and I'll take it.
So he backs away from everything. Meanwhile, the press keeps attacking. People... they don't like Clarendon. Clarendon's assistant at San Quentin, Dr. Jones, he wants to get rid of Clarendon, and he starts to engineer this whole legislative way to do it, where basically he starts lobbying the legislation of San Francisco, or of California in Sacramento, to take away the authority of the governor to make these appointments and give it up to a board.
The prison board specifically.
He's got a relative on the prison board, basically.
Yep.
And it works. Now, Dr. Clarendon, because he's so focused on his work, is completely oblivious to this fact. And one day, the chairman of the board, who is related to Dr. Jones, shows up at San Quentin and basically says, hey, I'm in charge here.
Well, he's showing him around, and then Clarendon comes in and says, who are you? What are you doing here? You're not allowed in here. And he goes, well, actually, I am allowed here. He goes, no, you're not. Get out. I know what I'm doing. He goes, why are you not treating these people? Why are you not giving them water? Why are you not doing this? And he goes, who are you? Are in no position to tell me anything. I am the man in charge of this institution. He goes, oh, no, you're not. I am, because I'm the head of the board. And then he says, oh, well, the board, I don't answer to the board. I answer only to the governor. And he goes, oh, no, you don't.
And then it's got a great conclusion to that scene, where it says,
transformed by the insult to a sudden dynamo of hate, the slender scientist launched out with both fists in a burst of preternatural strength, of which no one would have thought him capable. And if his strength was preternatural, his accuracy of aim was no less so. For not even a champion of the ring could have wrought a neater result. Both men, the chairman and Dr. Jones, were squarely hit, the one full in the face and the other on the point of the chin. Going down like felled trees, they lay motionless and unconscious on the floor, while Clarendon, now clear and completely master of himself, took his hat and cane and went out to join Sarama in the launch. Only when seated in the moving boat did he at last give audible vent to the frightful rage that consumed him. Then, with face convulsed, he called down imprecations from the stars and gulfs beyond the stars, so that even Sarama shuddered, made an elder sign that no book of history records, and forgot to chuckle.
Bam!
that was awesome. That was because it was so out of left field that I'm like, what? He's like a superhuman.
He did a double punch.
He punched two guys at the same time. Not like a 1-2 punch. He just reached out with both arms and punched 2 guys and knocked them out.
He knocked him out with both fists. This doctor.
Yeah. It was ridiculous. So now we're into part 4.
What's going on in part 4?
Georgina's brother, Clarendon, he is devastated because now he doesn't have his institution anymore to work from. So he's just kind of bumming around and being sad and feeling crappy about himself. And she's trying to cheer him up, doesn't do anything. He doesn't dress. He doesn't, he's just a wreck.
It's making Sarama a little antsy because his favorite thing is experiments and grabbing those animals and basically torturing them, I mean, he loves dragging them into the clinic for them to be tested on.
Yeah.
So he's getting really antsy around the house. Georgina obviously doesn't like that her brother's so depressed, but she does say, hey, look, these animals aren't dying. She thinks, well, I wish that this would kind of go on a little longer because maybe he'll get some rest and stop being so crazy, and then some of these animals will survive. Unfortunately, what happens is Sarama gets some kind of package from Algiers. It's got some kind of terrible odor.
It smells terrible.
And they have a thunderstorm that night, which is really rare in California.
Uh-huh.
And the next day, Clarendon is suddenly like, hey, yeah, I'm back into doing our experiments. And Sarama is real happy, and he starts grabbing animals from the cages and bringing them back to the clinic.
Yep.
They actually go through all of the animals pretty quickly.
Yeah, and Clarendon is starting to freak out. It's like, we need more animals. We got to get more animals. And Sarama...
It's another case where Georgina overhears a conversation that those two are having.
Yes. Sarama says, hey, man, chill out. We've got plenty of time. Don't worry about it. He says things like, you're like a child in your impatience. I've been around. I know things.
Right.
Relax, and eventually we'll get these things taken care of. And then he says, I can't relax. We have to do this now. It's really important.
And Sarama is advocating that they start testing on the Tibetan servants.
Yes.
He's basically saying, look, we do still have some specimens just because all the animals are gone. These Tibetan guys got to eat at some point, and I can grab them. I say we start with Sanpo because he's not that useful. Pretty creepy. And of course, that freaks Georgina out.
Yeah.
And she basically faints.
She faints.
The next day, she wakes up. She thinks, I was just being crazy. They were just having a crazy scientist conversation. Everything's okay. But
there's a gunshot.
She looks out, and Sarama's basically holding a gun on Sampo, who's trying to get away.
Uh-huh.
He pulls out a knife, but Sarama shoots the knife out of his hand.
And basically grabs him by the scruff of the neck and then just drags him into the clinic.
And then she faints again. Yeah. So she finally goes and she talks to her brother. And it's like, why are you freaking out? What's going on? And he says, days of work have been wasted. How am I going to get anywhere if I can't get some decent subjects? He's basically like afraid that somebody else is going to discover the cure for all of these fevers, and he's going to get scooped. And he's saying, everything is a sacrifice to the ultimate good. All these animals have to die. I know you don't like it, but they have to. Even I am a sacrifice. My happiness, my body, it means nothing.
And it's not just about humanity. It's about science. It's about knowledge. Humanity is kind of, this is where his attitude sort of changes a little bit in the story. He stops talking about humanity. He starts talking about just pure knowledge, and that humans aren't even going to always be around, and humans are a transitory thing, but knowledge is superior.
She thinks that's a horrible thing to say, and he's like, horrible. What, Sarama knows some stuff. There were things that were known to the priests of Atlantis when our forebears were shambling around Asia as speechless semi-apes. And he says, I once heard an old man in China calling on Yog-Sothoth.
Yeah.
And then he makes another sign in the air. This is Lovecraft working in his
mythos,
his Yog-Sothoth.
And then basically he says, look, you should be helping me because you are, my sister, and this is important, and I know it's important to you. And she goes, yeah, well, okay, I'll help you. I understand this is important, and I've given up a lot, and I'll give up more. And he's like, oh, really?
And
good.
the dog gets sick suddenly.
Uh-huh.
And then her brother's very callous about treating the dog. They take it into the clinic.
The dog gets black fever.
And Sarama seems upset. He wants to treat the dog, which is strange for Sarama, but he doesn't like that the dog is sick. And Clarendon's like, whatever, he just goes to the library. He's not even interested. It upsets Georgina, and she says, somebody's got to step in. So she writes a message to Dalton, who's in Sacramento at the time.
Yeah.
Says, come to San Francisco. You've got to help us out. And that's how we get into the 5th chapter. Dalton gets the summons. He says, oh, I knew something would be up, and he gets back to San Francisco. One thing that's Georgina is starting to realize, even though all this madness is going on, it seems a little nicer. Something seems a little nicer around the house, and she realizes it's that all the Tibetan servants are now gone.
Yeah.
And so she decides, I've got to talk to my brother. I really have to try. She goes out to the clinic, and there's yet another scene where she overhears a fight between Sarama and her brother. Sarama's basically saying, as you said before, you need to slow down. You need to take care. And Alfred says to him,
You, damn you! You're a fine one to talk defeat and moderation to me. Who started all this anyway? Did I have any idea of your cursed devil gods and elder world? Did I ever, in my life, Think of your damned spaces beyond the stars and your crawling chaos Nyarlathotep. I was a normal scientific man, confound you, till I was fool enough to drag you out of the vaults with your devilish Atlantean secrets. You egged me on, and now you want to cut me off. You loaf around doing nothing and telling me to go slow, when you might just as well as not be going out and getting material. You know damn well that I don't know how to go about such things, whereas you must have been an old hand at it before the earth was made. It's like you damned walking corpse, to start something you won't or can't finish.
So we kind of find out who Sarama is, and it seems like he's sort of some Atlantean sorcerer that was like in a tomb, and he was brought back to life somehow.
Yeah, and he's had it at this point. He says, Clarendon, you're insane. You're no fun anymore. You're a jerk for sacrificing your poor sister's pet dog when you could have just spared him and we could have gotten some other kind of subjects. It's about time I tried somebody else. I'm not going to work with you anymore. I'm afraid you're going to have to go.
But then Clarendon says, hey, you know what? You don't know everything. I have my own tricks. I've worshipped at the underground shrines of Nug and Yeb and Ea Shub-Nugura.
Right.
This is the first time in this story that you hear Shub-Niggurath, Nug, Yeb.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of cool. I mean, I don't know. What is Shub-Niggurath? I hate saying that name.
It's sort of the black goat of the woods with 1,000 young. It's a great old one, elder god. It's a bad thing. You don't want any part of it.
Sarama laughs about, well, what, you're going to use some ancient, your words and your formulae, they don't mean anything to me. This is the material world. You've got your fever you can try and give me, but I've got a revolver that can shoot you before you can do that. So here we are.
Yeah.
They're kind of having a standoff. And Georgina leaves after having heard this. She kind of sinks into this swooning, fainting stupor. She first sends a message, get Dalton over here. She tells the maid to go get Dalton.
Yeah.
Alfred comes out and he sees that she's sick and he feels bad about it. He gives her a little water and she starts coming to. He says, I think you're a bit feverish. And she says, what are you talking about? I'm in perfect health. Don't worry about me. Yeah. And then he kind of has an idea.
And this idea is to get, affect his sister with this. And she realizes that that's the idea that's in his head. And then she goes, hey, well, maybe you should get some sleep. Everything's going to be okay. And he goes, yeah, let's get some sleep. Why don't I get some morphine for us? And we'll both get some sleep. And then he goes and takes off. And she's like, oh, no.
Yeah.
He's going to come.
My brother's going to freak me out.
The maid comes back and she's like, where's Dalton? She's like, oh, he wasn't there. So I left a message. And he's like, oh, I left a message. I need help. And so right as her brother comes back with a gold syringe fully loaded, Dalton shows up.
Yeah, thank goodness. He has her go up to her room while he talks with Clarendon. He said he has this pretense of why he came. He says, hey, I have this article that somebody gave me at the club, and it's this Dr. Miller of Philadelphia, and he's gotten ahead of you with the cure. I think it's a sort of an antitoxin to take care of all sorts of different fevers, which is what Alfred had been working toward. Alfred's like, well, I guess I could read that article. I was going to give my sister a hypodermic. Kind of getting in the way. And
so he reads it. And he just kind of collapses. He drops the syringe and sits on a chair, and he's like, oh, no, it happened. And then he sort of becomes sane again at that point.
Yeah, after he reads the article, the revelation that this other doctor actually is solving the problem freaks him out.
Yeah, and he comes clean at that point. He goes, you know what? Yeah. What's been going on is I've been crazy, and I can't tell you what I've seen and what has made me crazy because it'll make you crazy. But basically what I've been doing is I have been infecting people with the black fever. I'm the cause of the disease.
Yeah.
I've been feeding off people's death and misery, and that's why I've been doing this. And I can't explain to you how or why this works, but I've been doing it, and it's wrong. And I need you to go into my lab, destroy everything, and as for me, I'm going to be the last test. And he injects himself with the hypodermic.
Right. He admits, well, you're right. I was going to get my sister with this, but this guy's done all the work that I said I was going to do, and instead I've turned into this monster who's just killing people for the thrill of it, I guess.
Yeah.
And he injects himself. That's the last test. Dalton has the sister come down, and he says, say goodbye to your brother. He's got the fever. She does. She goes back up to her room, and then he sits with him, and he has horrible hallucinations, and he's freaking out, and he starts ranting about things that are otherworldly.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, Dalton can't stay awake, and he eventually falls asleep. When he wakes up, the clinic is burning, and Clarendon is gone.
Clarendon got up and set the thing on fire. Well, we assume.
In the fire at some point, there's this deep, hideous chuckle, and the flames of the burning clinic kind of start resembling these cyclopean creatures of nightmare.
Yeah, he laughs, and then all of a sudden, during the fire, lightning strikes, and then Sarama's not laughing anymore.
Oh, right, that's right, because it's got a great line. It says, his chuckle ceased, and in its place came a frantic, ululant yelp as of 1,000 ghouls and werewolves in torment. Werewolves.
It doesn't bring up werewolves too often. I'm glad that's put in there.
And Dalton saying, hey, you know what? He atoned for what he did. He was always trying to... that's the total B-movie 1950s moment. He was a great man, Georgie. Let's never forget that. We must always be proud of him, for he started out to help mankind and was titanic even in his sins. It's right out of there.
That's basically the end, except they find two bodies. One is Clarendon's, and the other looks mostly human, but it's a human skull and then some weird disjointed skeleton that isn't human and could only have been covered by robes and clothes that Sarama was wearing, implying that he wasn't even human. He was some weird thing.
Right. Under the robes.
Under the robes,
strange going then. And then there's a little epilogue. It says,
the Daltons have led, on the whole, a very happy life, for their cloud of terror lies far in the background, and a strong mutual love has kept the world fresh for them. But there are things which disturb them oddly, little things, of which one would scarcely ever think of complaining. They cannot bear persons who are lean or deep-voiced beyond certain limits, and Georgina turns pale at the sound of any guttural chuckling. Senator Dalton has a mixed horror of occultism, hypodermics, and strange alphabets which most find hard to unify. And there are still those who blame him for the vast proportion of the Doctor's library that he destroyed with such painstaking completeness.
That's some funny phobia that he's got a fear of strange alphabets.
Oh, golly.
Oh, now that was a long one to get through.
It was.
As you said before, we shouldn't dig on this thing too much before we get through it. Okay, we got through it. I hated this story.
Yeah, well, I didn't hate it. I found it interesting, but in that really bad B-movie kind of way. I was really... I read the whole thing in well, not really one sitting, but I tried to read it in one sitting. And I was interested in what happened and what was the cause of this black fever and what was going to be revealed. I mean, I was actually very surprised when he just said, yeah, I was infecting people and just getting off on it and getting power from death. And I was like, whoa, that is dark.
I just thought it was cheap. I thought that there was going to be more going on, like he was infecting the people so that he could get ahead or learn something. I don't know. In the end, that it was just, I've got Cthulhu in a bottle. I've got some kind of old world Lovecraftian magic I'm injecting people with, and I just like to see him die. Like, it didn't even make any sense to me. It didn't make any sense. I couldn't reconcile that with the character that they set up.
Yeah, and I felt like it was a kind of a mashup of Herbert West Reanimator and the case of Charles Dexter Ward. There's a sort of that elements where they're arguing and they're cohorts in this dark stuff, and then there's also the fact that he's doing all these experiments and he's caught up in the science of it. And well, he wasn't actually caught up in the science of it. He was caught up in the murder of it.
Right. Now, Adolphe de Castro was a very interesting guy, actually, that wrote this original story that Lovecraft then revised. And he had a whole slew of careers. He was a dentist for a long time. He was a lawyer. He lived in several different places, mostly in California, but all over the world. I believe this was written in 1927, but this was based on a story he'd written many years before.
Yeah, it was written in 1893. It was in a book called In the Confessional and the Following. Mm-hmm. The story was called A Sacrifice to Science, but Lovecraft called it Clarendon's Last Test, and then eventually it got changed to just The Last Test. Lovecraft
had some funny... Well, we don't know much about De Castro as a person or what he was like. We just know some of what his accomplishments were and what his career was, but luckily in Lovecraft's letters we do get some some description. Lovecraft said of De Castro, "Old Dolph is a portly, sentimental, and gesticulating person given to egotistical rambling about old times and the great men he has intimately known. He entertained everybody with his loquacious egotism and pompous reminiscence of intimacies with the great. He regaled us with tedious anecdotes of how he secured the election of Roosevelt, Taft, and Harding as president. According to himself, he is apparently America's foremost power behind the throne." So he's a blowhard, right?
Yeah.
And that lines up with Lovecraft didn't like doing these revisions. He got paid.
Yeah. Well, he didn't get paid much. He got paid $16 for his work on this story. And then Castro went and sold it to Weird Tales for $175.
Yeah, and I heard that when Lovecraft was quoting his prices for doing this kind of ghostwriting, or this revision work, that De Castro was like, that's too much, and bargained him down. And, most people think, if they look at the original version, that really the reason that these stories were well received at all was because of Lovecraft's work. Right. I mean, he really rehashed it. In fact, so in a letter to his aunt Lillian, Lovecraft wrote that The Last Test was the story that ruined his winter. And And in another letter to Frank Long, he described it. He says, and I'm calling in your aid right now in the case of old Dolph. He is too goddamn fussy to make his work a paying proposition for me, for his fiction is unspeakable, his paying ability meager, and his demands for revision after his first version extensive. I about exploded over the dragging monotony of a silly thing which I renamed Clarendon's Last Test. Now, after thinking it over, he's decided to use the tale just as I fixed it up, which means that he probably just kept having him turn in revisions and then he went with what he'd originally done. That's so frustrating. He says, Vaya con Dios, Don Adolfo. Here's one reviser who won't raise any controversy by claiming authorship of this beastly mess. And he didn't at first. I think that De Castro published it under his name.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was first published in Weird Tales in November of 1928, and it was collected in this book called Cats.
But those were as a De Castro story.
Yeah, those were De Castro stories. It didn't get published as a Lovecraft work until 1989.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That late?
And that was in The Horror in the Museum and Other Revisions by S.T. Joshi.
In some other letters, here's just a couple more things he wrote about De Castro. He said he called him an unctuous old hypocrite, a pestiferous old leech, a wily old braggart, and this is my favorite, a queer cuss.
Yeah, he's a queer cuss.
But it was even like at one point he was so sick of him during these revisions, he wrote, I hope he goes down to Mexico and gets shot or imprisoned.
Wow.
Yeah. So
man,
I didn't feel so bad about because I was starting to get angry while I was reading the story. It's really long, it's really dull, and it's very unsatisfying. And it took me a couple hours to read it yesterday, and I thought, this is a terrible way to spend my weekend.
Yeah.
I was really mad about it.
Yeah. I thought it was much shorter than it was until I sat down, because I was going to try and read it on the train, and then I ended up reading it on the train, and then I read it at home, and then I ate, and then I kept reading it. It was one of those where I was like, God, please end. Why don't you just be over? I want to thank this week's reader, Marty Jobson. Marty, you did a great job. Thanks for helping out. I appreciate it. And if you want to know more about what Marty does, we'll put a link to his website on our show.
Yeah, Marty's he's a science guy, right?
Yeah, he's a presenter who does lots of science type of bits for the BBC, so like explaining different types of scientific theories and how things work, and he builds lots of cool props and stuff like that.
I'd love it if he could explain how the black fever works, or
yeah, hopefully.
Or what is it that happens when scientists turn to murder?
Next week we're doing another twofer, Ibid and History of the Necronomicon.
Ibid and the History of the Necronomicon, and we'll have a guest, right?
Yeah, we're having a guest host who's James Holloway, archaeologist. We're going to talk to him about his seminar that he's done, and it really kind of applies to these two pieces of work, and he's all around fun guy, so it'll be great to have him on.
I'm really looking forward to that. Those are some short stories, so maybe we can spend a little more time just
chatting.
Yeah,
that'd be great.
Sounds good.
With that, I'm Chris Lackey.
I'm Chad Pfeiffer.
And this has been the H.P. Lovecraft Literary Podcast
at hppodcraft.com.
hppodcraft.com.